Love your shirt.
Thank you. It's actually a jumpsuit, so I'm head to toe strawberries.
Nice.
Cool. Can everybody see? Are we good?
Yeah,
Tech
you're
one.
good.
Cool. So my talk is about climate conscious design, emphasis on climate and emphasis on design. But before I get into anything, I think I owe you guys an answer to one question, which is, who the heck are you? I'm Rachel. I'm a person, and well, in terms of this talk, what's more relevant is that I'm a product designer, and I work at Spotify, and I also care very deeply about the environment. I've worked at a couple big startups as an intern and as a student. You might recognize some of them. You might even use their products. And these were extremely transformative and valuable experiences for me as a young designer and as just a student who is learning all things. But one thing that you guys are probably wondering, seeing these like logos and brands and companies that I've worked at, is what do any of these companies really have to do with climate change? And that's a very valid question. And really the first part of my answer is that I wasn't always interested in climate change. Big gasp, I know. Climate change and climate action wasn't always a fundamental part of my professional identity. I was definitely interested in it in terms of, you know, following the news and keeping up to date with the latest research and stuff like this, but I never up until recently believed that it could be a part of the actual work that I do. And so, like many of you, I was once a student, and as a student, as you probably know, I definitely lived very season to season and semester to semester. And what that means is, in the summers, I would do my internships. I would go into fall semester and start doing schoolwork. Spring brought a whole new load of schoolwork. And while this was really helpful in letting me learn a lot of different things in a short amount of time, I was constantly changing context. Like I changed, my environment changed, what I was focusing on, what I was learning, and my portfolio, frankly, changed season by season. And this felt a little bit unintentional or haphazard. Nothing felt deliberate or intentional learning. And so somewhere along these lines, I started getting this existential crisis of purpose and feeling like wanting more intentionality. And so I started asking myself a question that a lot of fifth graders frankly ask themselves: what do I want to do when I grow up? And yes, it was a little embarrassing for me to ask myself this as a 20-year-old, but nevertheless, I figured sooner rather than later. And so during this really stressful time of figuring myself out and figuring out what I wanted to be when I grow up, I got the really valuable advice to first figure out what I liked now, which what I really liked at the moment, things that made me feel excited, regardless of social obligation or peer pressure or money or any other stressor. What made me feel good and what I was excited about. And the good thing was I had actually a lot of answers to this question and a lot of easy answers to this question. Not all of them necessarily had to do with professionalism or what I wanted to be when I grew up, but it was a good exercise in understanding my own self-inclination and what I was naturally inclined towards. So this kind of little exercise led me to realize that I needed to find projects, or even a project that I felt really motivated to work on, that I could be doing nothing on a Saturday and like not have any work or anything and think that's the first thing I want to work on, which is a lot easier said than done, for sure. So my first step was to kind of look at what was immediately available to me, which was the things that were happening at my school. I looked for students or faculty or departments that were working on things, not necessarily in design, but we're working on cool things that I wanted to be a part of. And one of those things, one of my interests was in the sustainability initiatives that the school was doing. And lo and behold, the sustainability website at NYU has a little bit of a tag in their categories that says get involved. So I smashed that button and tried to learn as much as I could. One of the things that I found there was this really cool project called the Solar Powered Media Project. It was a group of students and faculty who were dedicated to understanding the environmental impact of the internet. One thing that they taught me was that there's this really big fallacy that we have to grapple with the internet's marketing and how we perceive it. I think it's understood as this very light and immaterial thing, this thing that lives in the sky, the cloud, and we don't think of it as it is, which it has this extremely brutal environmental impact and environmental burden that it places upon our planet. And so they wanted to make this educational resource to help people understand it better through the guise of bettering our knowledge through research. I got to work with a lot of cool people on this project, and I got to do a lot of cool things. We did everything from conservational research to just like Googling how to make a solar powered server and like looking at tutorials on YouTube on how these things work. But the biggest thing that I took from this was it really challenged my understanding of digital products, the things that I wanted to design. And that really excited me. I got to think of products in a very different way and kind of understand their place in the world and in the universe a little bit better. And this led me to do a personal project, work on this personal project that I call greendesign.io. It's a set of guidelines for designing low impact products. And this kind of was a great, easy transition from the Solar Powered Media Project. I got to use the research that we found there to inform designers like myself on just different principles that one might use when building and designing for digital products. And this was really exciting and really new and just really fulfilling as a personal project. And the one setback I started to realize was I was working with a lot of researchers and a lot of scientists, which was great, and I got a lot of empirical advice, but I didn't really have anybody to talk to when it came to critique or anything like this, and nobody really understood immediately around me this bridge between climate and design. So I started to realize that I'm a little bit lonely, and not in the literal sense, but rather that I didn't have people who could give me advice or who I could bounce ideas off of, who really understood what I was working on. And I think I was really seeking that at this kind of juncture in my life. So I decided I wanted to find other people who were also working on this kind of thing. I knew I couldn't be alone. I knew that there were other designers out there who must care about the environment. And when it comes to stuff like, grappling with climate change, I think the more the merrier. It's a really complex problem, which requires a lot of hands on deck and a lot of people talking to each other on solutions. Around the end of 2019, early this year, I found a group called the Climate Designers. They called themselves the Climate Designers, who were a group of creative professionals who were pushing for climate action in their work. And this was exactly what I was looking for. Not necessarily people who are working on my exact, line of work, which was climate, the internet, tech, and design, but people who weren't necessarily scientific or academic in the traditional sense when it came to climate change, and had this like creative building mindset and had to grapple with that identity as like not the conventional climate researcher per se. This led to a lot of really cool things happening. I get to host a lot of meetups regularly, gathering people from all across the globe who really love and care about the earth. We get to talk about the exact things that I was missing out on early on, which was critique and what we learned this week or this month, and how we can further our work. And sometimes we just chat about whatever. And I think that community building was really valuable to me. More recently, in response to the racial injustices that have been happening in the US the past few months and frankly forever, was this series of talks and series of discussions on climate design and racism. We, as climate designers, were trying to grapple with this like triptych Venn diagram of things that we were invested in: climate injustice, design and its identity, and racial injustice. And we got to learn kind of as a group and figure out what that looked like, mutual learning when it came to environmental injustices and the role design plays in it, by sharing our own expertises. And I got to learn from a lot of people who are doing very different things from me and have a very different background from me on this. So somewhere along the lines, at the end of 2019, I became a college senior, and I had the realization that I'm graduating. And it shouldn't have been a realization, but it definitely struck me very hard, and it was a very crazy realization that stressed me out. And I, had been working on all of these cool things, so I needed to figure out how to do that professionally and maybe hopefully make some money while I was at it. So while I was doing this, I started, what many people would call a job hunt. And the way I approached this was kind of thinking about companies as what I call climate positive and climate negative companies. This is not a formal term by any means, but what climate positive companies mean to me are companies whose product or mission or service that they provide fundamentally are working on solving climate change and impacting the environment positively. While climate negative companies, maybe their existential like identity doesn't necessarily touch on the climate change sphere, and maybe sometimes they harm it just by the nature of their existence. These were the companies that I'd worked at, and I think that troubled me a little bit. But I definitely knew from my experiences working there that at these places that there were people there who were very passionate about the environment and who were trying to make change internally. One great example of this is what Lyft has done recently. They made a commitment to 100% electric vehicles by 2030, which is like kind of a zero emissions commitment. And I thought this was extremely cool. I thought, here's a company who's intrinsically kind of harming the environment because they encourage travel via cars and travel via, just vehicles that pollute in general. And it was really exciting to see that they understood that, and they were investing time into grappling with that and trying to even it out. And the fact that they could make a commitment to transition their huge user base to a climate neutral or potentially even climate positive place was really exciting to me. And so as I was talking to these companies, this was something that I really was focusing on. And one of the companies that I ended up talking with was Spotify, which by all means is a climate negative company. But they had recently hired a head of sustainability who actually had a lot of cool things to say. They were publishing sustainability goals regularly, and they were also uniquely positioned towards carbon negativity. They're geographically headquartered in Stockholm in Scandinavia, and that's has an advantage towards renewables. People who live there tend to be a little bit more progressive when it comes to climate issues. And so I got all these like signals that there was potential positive change. And, you know, there were I definitely did a lot of more research beyond that just to see where things were going. And it seems like a green light. Luckily I was right. And there are and were a lot of ways that I, as a employee, could make a change. One of these is through content. The content on our platform that is curated or produced by Spotify employees can help educate people. This is a podcast playlist called Climate Crisis that a few of us podcast nerds compiled together for Earth Day this year. Just a list of podcast episodes that cover everything from environmental injustice and environmental racism to composting at home, and gave kind of entry level, sometimes a little bit more than entry level primers on all of these topics. And a lot of people listen to it, and hopefully some people learn something from this. But stuff like this that's curated by us or even produced by us, we recently announced a podcast produced by Gimlet that is specifically focused on climate change and what people can do about it. The next thing that I found was operational work. This isn't necessarily stuff that I immediately impact, but it's how the organization operates. And some ways that you can work on that is lowering waste and emissions for the whole organization, whether it's in terms of plane travel. We are an international company and we do a lot of flights from New York to Stockholm and vice versa. How to make our offices a little bit more renewable, reduce food waste there. We eat a lot of food as a big company, and, you know, transitioning to compostables over plastics, all these different things, which I surprisingly have a voice when it comes to this. And, you know, it's my feedback is taken into account, which is really satisfying. And the last thing is product, which is definitely what I work on a lot more. This has a big question mark because there, you know, things that I may not be able to share immediately, but some examples I can give are moving to a neutral emission server, which we did recently, or maybe not so recently. We moved to Google Cloud Platform from AWS, and making smarter content delivery, how we transfer music from the internet to your ears in a very in a more efficient way, and also helping users, whether it's listeners, podcast producers, music artists, make more informed decisions about their consumption and creation. Some examples could be like, you know, downloading a song if you're going to listen to it more than once, so you're not pulling it from the cloud all the time. Or maybe not downloading that podcast that you're not going to listen to, and things like this. And yeah, so that kind of brings me to now. I've been able to do a lot of cool things, and I hope to continue to do cool things. But when I look over what I did, there are definitely some big questions that I asked myself. If you guys remember, the first one was, what was I really motivated to work on? What I could, you know, forego financial or social obligations to be excited about. The next one was who else was working on this kind of thing, because I think camaraderie and having other people around you who are also working on this can help you feel a little bit less alone, and also just create this collective effort that I think, you know, is a lot better than one person standing on a platform and yelling. And then the last thing is how to make an impact professionally. And this doesn't necessarily mean from a monetary perspective, but I think like from Jeff's talk, you can definitely get an idea of what that looks like in terms of impact and in terms of utilizing your scope and sphere of influence. So yeah, I think, you know, I don't think this is necessarily the gold standard or the like framework that everybody should follow, but it definitely helped me. And I think the answering these questions or asking these questions can help you get a little bit of clarity on in terms of what kind of impact you want to make and how to do that. And that's it. I have a question slide if anybody has questions.
Thanks, Rachel. That was such a great talk. It was so nice hearing your story into being more climate conscious and voicing your concerns at the company that you work at. And I'll get started with questions right away. So Sarah Rath asks, how do you find the time to work on such a great side project while balancing your work life at Spotify and then, of course, your own life?
Right, that's definitely a tough question. I think, you know, placing boundaries on each of those spheres, right? I don't want work to take over my life, but I also don't want my personal projects to take over my life, or, you know, my social stuff. It all kind of like has a balance, and I think sometimes it does get crazy. One solution that I found, or one solution that I'm about to do, is I applied a while ago to what's called a decelerator, which grants people like a week of time to kind of hack on their own projects, and kind of like take a step back from the craziness of life. And that's definitely something I'm going to work on with green design, is being able to separate myself from other stuff and kind of devote some love and attention to that. And I think stuff like that tends to help, like being able to step back. But I don't think there's necessarily a huge answer. I'm also not the best at keeping a balance of in terms of time and productivity. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer that.
Same here. Leah Claren asks, how has the COVID-19 crisis affected the work surrounding climate conscious design? How has it shifted some goals or reframed some issues, in your opinion?
Right. I think this goes a little bit beyond climate and design, but I think, you know, we've gotten a lot of empirical evidence in terms of behavior that we can adopt, how much our current way of living pollutes the environment, because, you know, when cities shut down, we got to see exactly the impact that they had on the environment and how their emissions kind of stacked up in terms of numbers. And I think that was really exciting for me as a designer, because like I don't necessarily have a researcher right next to me constantly feeding me the questions that I have. I think typically designers get a research counterpart that they can ask questions with and can provide them with research. But you know, when you're a climate designer, sometimes you just have to rely on researchers around the globe. And so I think this, you know, the silver lining, not that we should be finding silver linings in a pandemic, is that I did get a lot more research, and the people who are also working on this kind of stuff got a lot more numbers in terms of quantitative data to kind of further our work. Yeah, there are also a lot of other things surrounding, maybe in terms of what people are passionate about. I think it's definitely been a huge distractor, and I think a lot of climate work happens on the ground and not, you know, at our desks. And so that's definitely been the setback when it comes to COVID.
Yeah. Okay. Jessica Lau asks, any tips on how to be more climate friendly for print-based designers? And I guess in prototyping, there is a lot of general waste from test printing and whatnot. But have you done anything in your personal design life to combat such issues?
Yeah, I think when it comes to paper and prototyping with like materials, I would say like compostable materials are a great solution. Ideally, if you can generate less material waste, the better anyways. But sometimes, you know, when it's unavoidable, I would say like anything that's compostable is probably the best way to go.
Great. And then finally, Sabrina asks, what is the biggest climate-friendly myth you found through your research as a climate designer?
I really do think that it's the fact that the internet doesn't really have a carbon footprint, or that it has much less of a carbon footprint than it does, which I think like a lot of people go back and forth on in terms of how big it is and how big of a priority it is. I will say it's not on, our in the public's eye, like as one of the biggest concerns, because I think we do have a lot to worry about. But I would say, like, as a designer, what's really compelling to me is like, oh, how is this marketed, and how's, I hate to say branded, but how is environmentalism and the internet branded? And I think the internet is branded as a very environmentally neutral zone, but I think, that's a crazy fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Green labeling also comes to mind.
Totally.
When you're all right, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you so much, Rachel.